The Galactic Council Chamber was a vast amphitheater of polished obsidian and living light, a place where the fate of 1,000 sentient species was debated under the cold gaze of ancient dead stars. Ambassador Alara Vance of Earth stood at her designated console, a small island of unremarkable flesh and blood amidst a sea of chitin, scales, and energy fields. For the past 3 standard cycles, humanity had been a quiet, almost forgettable member of this grand assembly. They were skilled traders, tenacious explorers, and as the Council had recently discovered, unexpectedly formidable warriors. But they were still considered new, naive, their moral compass a quaint relic of their tumultuous past. That perception was about to be shattered. The subject of the day was the Vorkith, a cephalopod-like species from the dark, gravity-crushed world of Thrax Primus. The Vorkath were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were pirates, slavers, and extortionists who operated from a nebula so dense with radiation and gravitational anomalies that it was a natural fortress. For centuries, they had preyed on the shipping lanes of the Outer Rim, raiding colony worlds for biological resources, namely sentient beings to serve as neural processors in their biomechanical dreadnoughts. The Council had tried sanctions, blockades, and finally, a unified fleet action. The Vorkith had simply retreated into their nebula, luring the combined fleet into a trap that had cost the Council 17 cruisers and over 40,000 lives. They had overreached. A Vorkith raiding party had attacked a human outer colony, New Anatolia. The colony's defense grid had held long enough for a distress signal to reach the nearest human battle group. The response had been swift and absolute. Every Vorkath vessel involved in the raid was either destroyed or disabled, and for the first time, the Council had living Vorkith commanders in custody. High Counselor Thylek Shran, a mantis-like being from the Vexian Empire, presided over the chamber. His mandibles clicked with the weariness of a politician who had seen too many cycles of violence. The proposal before the Council is simple. The human government has refused our request to extradite the captured Vorkith commanders to Council custody. They claim a separate jurisprudence. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Jurisdiction was a sacred principle. A snort of derision came from the Marathi delegate, a being composed of swirling gas in a containment suit. Humanity's jurisprudence is a primitive concept. The Vorkith are a council matter. They have committed atrocities against a dozen species. We must bargain. The Vorkith value their breeding queens above all else. We offer the return of their commanders for a cessation of raids and the release of all council slaves. It is the way of things. Alara listened, her face impassive. She had been briefed on this way of things. The Council's strategy for dealing with the Vorkath for 3 centuries had been a cycle of raid, capture, and ransom. The Vorkath would take 1,000 beings, the Council would capture a few commanders, and a deal would be struck. The Vorkath would return a few hundred of the captured. The Council would return the commanders, and the cycle would begin again. It was a cold, calculated system that managed the violence but never ended it. Shran turned his multifaceted eyes toward the human delegate. Ambassador Vance, the Council understands the desire for vengeance. But we must be pragmatic. The Vorkith hold 3,000 Council citizens, including 200 of my own people, in their processing facilities. A swift negotiation is the only path to their survival. Alara stepped forward, her voice calm, carrying a weight that silenced the murmuring. High Counselor, my government has not refused extradition out of a desire for vengeance. We have refused because we have no intention of bargaining with murderers. The chamber went still. The Marathi delegate's gas form pulsed with agitation. This is arrogance. You are new to the stars. You do not understand the Vorkith. They do not respond to force, only to the logic of exchange. Alara's gaze was steady. We understand them perfectly. We have studied their tactics, their history with this council, and their biology. The Vorkith value their commanders not just as strategic assets, but as the primary genetic contributors to their next generation of queens. Without them, their breeding programs collapse. That is the logic you have relied on. It is a logic of mutual predation. You allow them to murder 1,000 to save 100, and you call it peace. She touched her console, and a holographic image of the Vorkith Nebula appeared above the central dais. Your fleets could never enter the nebula because your ships rely on sensor arrays and shield frequencies that the Vorkith have had centuries to map and counter. Human ships are different. Our sensor suites are redundant, our shielding layered, and our tactical doctrine is not based on fleet formations you would recognize. A cold silence descended. Shran's antennae twitched. What are you saying, Ambassador? I am saying that the Council's proposal is rejected. There will be no exchange. The Vorketh commanders will face trial for crimes against humanity on New Anatolia. The sentence, given the evidence, will be execution. A wave of protests erupted. The Vexian delegate shrieked, "You will doom 3,000 beings." Alara raised her voice, not to shout, but with a finality that cut through the noise. "No, we will end the logic that led to their capture. The Vorkith have one chance. They will release every single sentient being in their possession, unconditionally, within the next 72 standard hours. They will withdraw all forces to their nebula and cease all extraterritorial operations. If they do so, we will not enter their space." The Maradi delegate laughed, a sound like escaping steam. "And if they do not? What will your jurisprudence do? Read them a sternly worded verdict from the edge of the nebula?" Illyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "If they do not, we will no longer have a reason to exercise restraint. Humanity does not bargain with murderers. We don't make deals for hostages. We don't pay ransom. We remove the threat." She deactivated the hologram. "The Council has attempted to contain the Vorkith for 300 years. You've managed them. You haven't defeated them. We intend to finish what you started. Our fleet has already moved into position. The Vorkith have their 72 hours. I suggest you use your influence to encourage them to accept." She turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a stunned assembly. The Council had just witnessed the birth of something it didn't fully understand. Humanity wasn't making a threat. It was stating a fact, the same way it might state the boiling point of water or the acceleration of gravity. The rules of the galaxy, carefully balanced on the fulcrum of negotiated violence for 3 millennia, had just been tossed aside. And in the cold, dark nebula, the Vorkith War Council was about to make a decision based on 3 centuries of experience, unaware that the paradigm they understood had just ceased to exist. The Vorkith's response came not in words, but in a broadcast of pure, calculated contempt, a vid feed, intercepted by Council listening posts and shared with the human delegation, showed the Vorkith Grand Admiral, a bloated horror of mottled flesh and too many eyes, speaking from the bridge of his dreadnought. He did not address the humans directly. Instead, he spoke to the Council, his translator's voice a wet, guttural rasp. The primitive species from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star makes demands. We have heard such boasts before. Your Vexian admirals, your Maradi battle fleets, all were swallowed by the silent nebula. We do not release our property. We do not negotiate with those who hold our breeders. You will return our commanders, or every cycle they are held, we will execute 100 of the Council beings in our care. The count begins now." The broadcast ended. The Council chamber erupted into panicked chaos. Delegates screamed accusations at the empty spot where Alara Vance had stood, as if her absence was the ultimate insult. Thylek Shran's mandibles were clicking in a rapid, distressed rhythm. The Moradi delegate was already drafting a resolution to condemn humanity's reckless provocation. They had no idea that the clock they thought was ticking down to a massacre had, in fact, already run out. While the council debated, humanity had been silent, not with hesitation, but with the focused quiet of a surgical team preparing for a procedure. Ambassador Vance had not returned to the council chambers. She was aboard the CNS Vengeance, the flagship of the first expeditionary fleet, positioned just outside the gravitational threshold of the silent nebula. She stood on the bridge, a place of soft lights and focused calm, watching a tactical display that showed the nebula as a churning wall of crimson and black dot Admiral Marcus Thorne. A man with a face carved from granite and eyes the color of a winter sky stood beside her. The Vorkith are entrenched in there. 27 dreadnoughts, countless smaller raiders, all linked by a sensor network that uses the nebula's own radiation as a carrier wave. Any conventional fleet that enters gets painted the moment they drop out of FTL. It's a shooting gallery. We're not a conventional fleet, Ilara said. Thorne nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. No, we're not. Operation Silent Hammer is a go. All elements are in position. The human plan was not based on overwhelming force or a single decisive battle. It was based on a principle the Vorkith, who had only ever faced enemies who thought in terms of fleets and territory, could not comprehend: systemic annihilation. Humanity had spent the 3 centuries of the Vorkith's reign observing from the sidelines, learning. They knew the nebula's quirks better than the Vorkith themselves. They had mapped its gravitational currents using stealth probes that emitted no energy, simply drifting through the void for years. They had analyzed the Vorkith biomechanical technology, finding the vulnerabilities in their hybrid organic circuitry. And they had built a new kind of warfare, one tailored for this single specific enemy. The first phase was silent. 50 stealth frigates, their hulls coated in a metamaterial that absorbed all radiation, slipped into the nebula like ghosts. Their mission was not to engage the dreadnoughts, but to hunt the supply lines. Vorkith vessels were organic. They required sustenance-specific minerals and biological slurries harvested from captured worlds and processing centers. The human frigates, using passive sensors, located the automated tankers and supply convoys that fed the Vorkith war machine. They did not destroy them with ship-to-ship combat. Instead, they used precision kinetic strikes, launching rods of tungsten at a fraction of light speed from extreme range. Tankers would simply cease to exist, replaced by expanding clouds of debris that registered as nothing more than a brief, anomalous blip on Vorkath sensors, easily mistaken for a micrometeoroid or a natural gravitational shearing. Within 12 hours, the Vorkith supply network was in shambles. Dreadnoughts began reporting resource deficiencies. Their organic components started to fail, their crews becoming sluggish as nutrient reserves dwindled. The Vorkith Grand Admiral, accustomed to enemies who massed at the nebula's mouth and announced their intentions, was confused. His first assumption was a mechanical failure. His second, a mutiny among his subordinate commanders hoarding supplies. The concept of an enemy who would infiltrate his supposedly impregnable fortress and methodically starve him out, without firing a single directed energy weapon, did not compute. The second phase began 30 hours into the 72-hour deadline. The Vorkith, true to their threat, prepared to execute 100 council prisoners. They herded them into a processing chamber aboard the dreadnought Obliterator. The broadcast was ready to go, a horrific spectacle designed to force the council to capitulate and demand the humans return the captured commanders. The execution never happened. A human electronic warfare vessel, stationed at the nebula's edge, had been passively mapping the Vorkith communication network. It found the resonance frequency of the organic crystals the Vorkith used as data conduits. When the order to begin the execution was sent, the human vessel broadcast a powerful, targeted pulse on that exact frequency. Every data crystal within a 3-light-second radius of the obliterator's command node simultaneously resonated, cracked, and failed. The command was never received. More importantly, the Vorkith's ship-to-ship communications collapsed into chaos. Their tactical network, the very thing that made their nebula fortress so deadly, fragmented into isolated, blind nodes. The Grand Admiral was now operating in the dark. His ships starving, his crews panicking, his commands dissolving into static. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Vorkith knew fear. Not the fear of a rival fleet, which they could fight, but the fear of a predator they could not see, one that was dismantling their world piece by piece. They tried to launch scouts, but the human stealth frigates picked them off. They tried to consolidate their dreadnoughts, but without reliable communications. They had to rely on prearranged rendezvous points, which the humans had already seeded with remote minds. The Council, watching through long-range probes, was in a state of disbelief. They saw the Vorkith fleet, once an untouchable menace, descending into frantic, uncoordinated movements. They saw the supply convoys vanish. They saw the communications blackout. And they saw that humanity had not yet lost a single ship. The Mahratti delegate, who had mocked Alara Vance, now spoke in hushed, terrified tones. The Vexian admirals were demanding to know the human tactics, their technology. Humanity was not answering dot as the 72-hour deadline approached. The Grand Admiral, his empire crumbling around him, sent a new message. It was not a broadcast of contempt. It was a desperate, scrambled plea directed at the Council, begging for them to control their mad pet. He offered to release the prisoners. He offered 100-year cessation of raids. He offered tribute. The Council, finally understanding the shape of what was happening, relayed the message to Alara Vance with a note of frantic urgency. They saw an end to the crisis. A victory, even. Alara's response was a single sentence, forwarded to the Council and broadcast on all channels the Vorkith could still receive. The time for bargaining is over. You have 6 hours remaining. Position of renewed strength. It was a bold plan, the kind that had saved his species a dozen times before. He massed his fleet, the great biomechanical leviathans, pulsing with sickly bioluminescence as they gathered for the charge. The human fleet was waiting for them. But it was not the wall of battle wagons the Grand Admiral had anticipated. Admiral Thorne had positioned his main Force 12 heavy cruisers and the CNS, Vengeance in a loose arc outside the nebula's mouth. It was a visible, formidable line, but it was a lure. The real trap was what lay behind it dot as the Vorkith dreadnoughts emerged from the churning gases of the nebula. Their sensors cleared, and they saw the human ships. The Grand Admiral, his tactical sense returning, saw an opportunity. The human fleet was outnumbered in terms of raw tonnage. His dreadnoughts were built for close-quarters brawling, their hulls bristling with organic plasma cannons and boarding tendrils. He ordered a full-speed advance, intending to overwhelm the human line with a brutal, direct assault. For 30 seconds, it seemed to work. The human cruisers fired, their kinetic railguns and energy lances cutting into the lead Vorkith ships, but the dreadnought's thick, regenerating armor absorbed the punishment. They closed the distance, their own weapons beginning to find their mark. A human cruiser took a direct hit to its engine section, spiraling out of formation. The Grand Admiral's command ship, the Sovereign, let out a triumphant subsonic shriek. Then the third phase of Operation Silent. Hammer was sprung. The Vorkith had only ever known one type of space combat: ship against ship, fleet against fleet. They had never faced an enemy who treated a battlefield as an integrated system. As the Vorkith fleet committed to its charge, they passed over a series of seemingly inert asteroids that had drifted from the nebula's mouth over the past day. These were not asteroids. They were human weapons platforms, coated in the same stealth metamaterial as the frigates. As the Vorkith ships passed overhead, the platforms activated. They did not fire on the dreadnoughts. Instead, they projected a low-frequency gravitational field, a subtle manipulation of local space-time that did no damage on its own. But it was enough to disrupt the delicate inertial dampeners of the Vorkith, biomechanical drives. A third of the Vorkith fleet suddenly lurched, their propulsion systems sputtering as their organic components rebelled against the unexpected gravitational stress. The perfect charge became a chaotic scrum. Ships collided, their captains fighting for control. The Grand Admiral's formation, already suffering from communication failures, shattered. It was then that the human main force, which had been giving ground, stopped retreating. And from the flanks, the 50 stealth frigates, their mission of supply interdiction complete, emerged. They had been positioning themselves for hours, using the nebulous gases as cover. Now they struck the disoriented Vorkith formation from the sides and rear, their weapons targeting the exposed drive systems and the delicate organic bridges that served as command nodes. The battle lasted 47 minutes. It was not a contest of equals. It was a systematic dismantling. The humans fought with a cold, precise fury. Every weapon, every maneuver, had been planned, simulated, and optimized. They did not attempt to board the Vorkith ships or accept surrenders. They simply destroyed them, targeting their ability to fight, to flee, or to communicate. One by one, the great dreadnoughts went dark, their bioluminescent glow fading as their organic systems failed. The Grand Admiral's ship, the Sovereign, was the last. Crippled, its weapons offline, it drifted in a cloud of debris from its escorts. A single human frigate pulled alongside it. There was no boarding party, no demand for surrender. The frigate's commander sent a single tight-beam message to the Sovereign's bridge. It was a simple text file, translated into the Vorkith graphical language. It showed the coordinates of every remaining Vorkith asset in the nebula: supply depots, processing centers, hidden shipyards. And it showed the position of the human fleet, already moving to engage them. The message concluded, "You are the last operational capital ship. Your nebula is no longer a fortress. It is a cage. You have 1 hour to transmit an unconditional surrender and the coordinates of every living being in your possession. After that, we will have no reason to accept it." The Grand Admiral, his body deflated, his many eyes staring at the screen, understood. The cycle was over. His species had lived as predators for centuries, operating on the assumption that the galactic community valued stability over justice, negotiation over finality. They had been wrong. They had encountered a species that did not see murder as a bargaining chip, but as a condition for extinction. He surrendered. Within the hour, the coordinates of every holding facility, every slave camp, every processing center were transmitted. Human rescue ships, escorted by the stealth frigates, began the long, delicate work of extraction. 3,217 beings, Vexians, Moradi, and a dozen other species were pulled from the darkness, many seeing the light of a star for the first time in years. The Vorkith, their military shattered, their leadership captured, their nebula now patrolled by human picket ships, were confined to their home world. Their interstellar capability revoked by a council that was still trying to comprehend what had just occurred. The established rules. High Counselor Thylek Shran called the session to order. His voice, once weary, now held a note of something new uncertainty. The Council recognizes Ambassador Vance of the Terran Confederacy. Elara approached her console. She waited, letting the silence stretch, letting her presence be felt. She had no notes, no holographic displays. She spoke from memory, her voice carrying the same calm finality that had preceded the storm. High Counselor, fellow ambassadors. In the past 3 weeks, I have heard many words from this body. Gratitude, fear, accusations of brutality, debates on whether humanity's actions were proportionate. The Vorkith killed tens of thousands of sentient beings over 3 centuries. They enslaved hundreds of thousands more. And this council managed that suffering. You optimized it. You created a system where the violence was predictable, where the number of dead could be calculated and weighed against the cost of a real war. You called it diplomacy. She looked around the chamber, her gaze piercing through the alien facades. You want to know what humanity is. You want to fit us into your calculus. Are we conquerors? Vigilantes? A new threat to be balanced against the old? You are asking the wrong questions. The question you should be asking is why we did what we did. The Moradi delegate, his gas form subdued, pulsed a question. And why was that? To prove your strength? To seize power? Alara shook her head. No, we did it because we were you once. We spent millennia making the same bargains you did. We traded with murderers. We ransomed our citizens back from pirates. We accepted a certain amount of atrocity as the price of stability. And it never worked. The murderers always wanted more. The pirates always came back. The price of stability was always paid by the innocent. And it always increased. She touched her console, and a simple image appeared, a photograph of the new Anatolia colony before the attack, a vibrant settlement of domes and greenery against a rust-colored sky. Then, another image, the aftermath, a field of twisted metal and scorched earth. The Vorkith killed 347 human beings on New Anatolia. They did it for slaves and spare parts. The Council's plan was to trade the lives of their commanders for the lives of the hostages they still held, leaving the Vorkith military intact, their capacity for future atrocity unchanged. You are not offering us a solution. You are asking us to become complicit in your cycle. She let the images fade. Humanity has a law. It's not a treaty or a resolution. It's older than our spaceflight. It's the principle that when someone crosses a line, when they commit an act of murder on a scale that cannot be ignored, you do not negotiate with them. You do not calculate the cost-benefit of their existence. You end their ability to ever do it again. We did not destroy the Vorkith as a species. We destroyed their capacity to wage war. We freed their slaves. We removed their leadership. And we did it without asking permission, without seeking a balanced outcome that would have left them free to raid another day. A Vexian delegate, his exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's light, spoke with a sharp, accusatory click. And what of the Council's authority? You acted without our consent. You violated the protocols of engagement that have governed interstellar relations for 3,000 cycles. What is to stop you from doing this again, against another species you deem murderers? Alara's eyes narrowed. What stopped the Vorkith? What stopped the 18 other raider species this council has managed over those 3,000 cycles? Protocols? Resolutions? The only thing that ever stopped a predator was the certainty of a response they could not survive. Humanity has not come to impose its morality on the galaxy. We don't want to rule the council or police your space. But we will no longer participate in a system that protects the powerful and sacrifices the vulnerable. You have a choice, Council. You can continue your cycle of managed violence. Or you can accept a new reality. When a species makes itself a threat by committing acts of mass murder, the old rules of bargaining and ransom will no longer apply. Humanity will act with or without your approval. The chamber was silent. The old powers Vexian, Moradi, and the others were doing the calculations that had defined their civilizations for millennia. They were trying to assess the threat, to determine how to balance this new variable. But for the first time, their equations failed. Humanity was not a variable to be balanced. It was a constant, a fundamental shift in the equation itself. Shran was the first to break the silence. His mandibles were still, his voice low. "And what do you propose, Ambassador? A galaxy policed by your principle? A war without end against every species that commits a crime?" Elara smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "No, High Counselor. We propose a simple addition to your charter. A single line. No member species of the Galactic Council shall negotiate with any entity that has committed acts of sentient mass murder, nor shall they protect any entity that does so. Such entities shall be considered hostis humani generis enemies of all. Sapient kind and any member species shall have the right and the duty to act against them. We are not asking for the right to police the galaxy. We are asking for the galaxy to accept that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed with a treaty." She looked at each delegate in turn. "This is not a threat. It is an offer. For 3 centuries, you have lived with the Vorkith. For 3,000 years, you have lived with others like them. You have traded lives for temporary peace. We are offering you a different path, one where the murderers are not managed. They are ended. The choice is yours." She stepped back from her console. Her piece said, "The council would debate. They would argue, posture, and try to find a way to dilute her proposal into something they could control. But they all knew, deep in their ancient bones, that things had changed. The quiet, unassuming species from the unremarkable star had drawn a line in the void, and they had shown beyond any doubt that they had the will and the means to enforce it. The cycle of bargaining with murderers was over. A new era had begun, not with a treaty or a declaration, but with the simple, terrifying realization that humanity had been watching all along, waiting for the moment to teach the galaxy a lesson it had learned in blood and fire long before it ever reached the stars. Some prices are too high to pay, and some enemies are not worth negotiating with.